Hello and welcome. Let me start by reminding you to silence, turn off, or smash your pocket robot into smithereens, as is your preference. Okay, see, nobody doing anything, so either you've already done it or you've decided to defy me from the outset. Okay, fair enough. All right, that's the tone we want to set today, is it? All right, I can run with that. I want to start reminiscing, as if to show my age, the first time I spoke at GDC in 2004. Toru Iwatani, the creator of Pac-Man, was a speaker that year and gave an absolutely blistering speech in Japanese that nobody understood. There was a translator. I do speak a little Japanese, although nowhere near enough to stay on top of it, so we were all very grateful for the translator. And that talk was called The Secret of Pac-Man's Success. And I must confess, I don't think anybody in the room really got Iwatani-san's point while the presentation was on. There was a point at which, and this I think is the thing that really stuck with me, there's a point at which he stuck up a slide of an escalator suggesting that this was the secret of Pac-Man's success in a kind of inscrutable Japanese way, in that way that Japanese poetry and literature must not actually tell you what we're talking about, but leave it for you to imply what's going on, right? And so, knowing he had a room full of game designers, he asked us, so why the escalator? What's the connection between the escalator and Pac-Man? And we all gave our informed, intelligent, and very creative explanations for why, all of which were completely and utterly wrong. And Iwatani-san decided not to tell us what the connection was. So I continued to ponder it for days after the event. I had a magical experience at that talk. It really did stick with me. But it was only when I got back from San Francisco that I finally realized the point that the escalator was supposed to make. And the point was not the point that I'd raised, which I was very proud of and it was very wrong, which was the escalator still works even if it doesn't have any power, which I think is an awesome thing about escalators. It's still a stairs, right? Even when it doesn't have power. Good luck finding a video game that has that property. But I finally realized what it was. It was that nobody ever has to ask how to use an escalator, right? The escalator has, as Iwatani-san put it, clarity of purpose, right? You don't need to explain how to use an escalator. It is instantly, immediately, and indelibly clear what you do with it. And as far as Iwatani-san was concerned, this was also a key part of the secret of Pac-Man's success. I don't want to sell it short. I think that AI design with a handful of rules whereby the ghosts give you the best chase scene in video games or movie history is also fantastic. But this point, the clarity of purpose of Pac-Man, someone seeing somebody else play Pac-Man or even watching the attract mode immediately understands what's going on. And Pac-Man only has a joystick, right? It only works in 4 directions. All you have to do is push the stick to go in the ways that the maze is arranged. That clarity of purpose, I think, is one aspect of what I want to talk to you about today, how to design easy-to-learn games, all right? But of course, this is terribly difficult, right? And these days, even more difficult to release a game with the simplicity of Pac-Man because, to say the least, video games have moved on a fair bit since the early 80s 8-bits, much to my sadness, I must say. I wish I could have been an 8-bit video game designer. Anyway. Right, some of you already know who I am, but for those of you who don't, I suppose I am obligated to explain who I am. Hello, my name is Chris Bateman. When I first went to Japan for the Tokyo Game Show, one of the other people who was there on the jolly that the government paid for, good gig that, described my company in a way that really stuck with me as the A-team of video games, which I absolutely loved. And that company is International Hobo. We were founded in 1999, and the original concept was we thought if we got people with experience in narrative and writing working alongside people who had experience in game design, we could escape from the trap that the industry was moving into of making, shall we say, animated movies cut together with gameplay, and actually try and find some way of doing what we then called narrative design. And thanks in part to the GDC gigs that I did, this term narrative design actually headed out into the video games industry, where we received 0 credit and certainly no royalties for it. But still, I can use it for PR. These days, we still do narrative design, we still do writing. In fact, we've done, I think, 2 European gigs writing this year, one in the UK and one in Germany. But a large part of what my company does these days is a service we offered from the beginning, but took quite a while to bed in, which we call a design audit. And what these are 2-week reports on a work in progress build, right? So a publisher sends us a vertical slice or an alpha or a beta, and then we've assigned a team in advance to look at this build. We look at what's working and what's not working in the context of the vision of the game, which we also need. The developer has to tell us what they're trying to do. Otherwise, we're just guessing, right? And a key reason these reports are so popular is we look at what's working and not working as fresh eyes, but we're absolutely adamant that as outsiders, we have no business deciding what to do with that information, right? So instead of what some consultants, who I'm not going to dob in, will do and tell everyone what they should be doing, that's not our business. We don't live in the game, we're just visiting, right? So instead, we provide a bunch of what we call modular options, which are conversation starters, right? What we would do if it was our game is look at these lines of attack. And the sign that this service is working as I wanted it to, at GDC this year, 2 developers who a publisher paid to audit wanted our contact details and wanted to meet up with us at GDC because they wanted to use us on their own projects. And that's such a relief. My fear when we first offered this service was being a stick to beat developers with, which I think sometimes consultants are, and I could not imagine anything more horrifying. So I'm really pleased with how that's gone. We've worked on a lot of games. If you count some that were not released or that we aren't allowed to say we worked on, it's over 100. I think the published and can talk about is somewhere between 80 and 90. Published and we would want to talk about is slightly smaller, but that's a separate problem. And I've also written a ton of books, initially in video games, obviously, but then I went through, what would we call it? The existential video game crisis, the point at which you know you can't leave video games, but you still would like to talk about anything else but video games. And so I went into writing philosophy for a bit, which was a ton of fun, and I really enjoyed it. The probably most relevant, although not to my talk today, is this. It's the Bloomsbury 2nd edition of Game Writing Narrative Skills for Video Games. That first came out in, what have we got out there? 2007. It's recently been updated and re-released. It's a collection of essays by different people, which I think is its real strength as a book, right? This is not laying down one theory of how things are done. It's lots of different people who work in video games saying, this is how we approach this problem, right? I think it's an excellent reference book, and I encourage you all to buy 3 copies today and give 2 to your friends. Anyway. All right, so there's me, King Rastan. A little bit at the end of my career, looking back on my time as a thief and a murderer. Well, that's Rastan's talk anyway. Anyone in this room know this video game, Rastan Saga? Yes, awesome. Right, I need to buy you a drink. Yes, Rastan Saga, brilliant Taito game that I've just stolen images from because they're so cool. This talk comes in 2 stages. Stage 1 is player practices. What on earth do I mean by player practices? Well, let's get stuck in. So, I assume we know this game. It's an embarrassing game to start with, I admit, but it's a good choice for reasons that become clear. Candy Crush Saga, where does it come from? Anyone in the... I can't do that because you need a microphone. All right, okay, I won't refer it to the room or we'll slow us down to a crawl. Go on. We'll get to Bejeweled, but it goes back much earlier than that. It goes back to 1995, Paneled Upon, okay? And when they brought it over to Europe, they called it Tetris Attack, which is a stupid title because it has nothing to do with Tetris, and adding Yoshi into a Tetris game solves nothing, right? Paneled Upon, panel of the pon. Pon being the sound that a balloon makes in Japanese when it pops. In English, it pops, but in Japanese, it bombs, okay? So Panel Pop is what it should have been called, and it's an awesome game. If you're a systems designer, games designer here today, and you've got a Switch, which you probably do, even though you're probably embarrassed by owning the Switch because of its technical limitations, and you've got a subscription to the online service, do go and check out this game. It will take you about 8 hours of play before you appreciate how utterly brilliant it is, right? It's got an absolutely sterling systems design. It's an amazing puzzle game. My wife and I still play it now. And it's a real piece of history, but it did not do good business, right? And I don't believe the reason it didn't do business is the fairy theming, because certainly putting Yoshi in instead of fairies did nothing to improve it. But Intelligent Systems gave one more shot at rejuvenating this awesome systems design in 2000 by throwing the Pokemon license to it, the all-powerful Pokemon license. Surely that will solve all ills. Well, no. Because the thing is, Pokemon Puzzle League, sure, it adds the Pokemon license, but the Pokemon license has nothing to do with what Panelled Upon is about, right? It's this horrible example of wrapping paper narrative, right? Whereby they haven't looked at what the system is and then found what that system does in terms of its stories and its experience. They've just said, we've got a Pokemon license, let's slap it on. There's nothing in Pokemon that works with this system. But same year, 2000, gentleman down there called it Bejeweled. Bejeweled, huge hit, right? So huge that EA bought PopCap and stopped them from making any more games in the brilliant way that PopCap did, in that lovely way that EA loves to do, to buy up companies and say, now you can't make these wonderful, wonderful games. As Brits, we still hold a grudge for Bullfrog. But Bejeweled does something really significant to make Panelled Upon appeal to a wider audience, okay? And one of the things it does is small. In Panelled Upon, the tiles stack up like Tetris pieces. It's the only possible link to Tetris that the Tetris Attack name would give you. So you can move one from the top and it will drop down. That means you can massively reconfigure the playfield. It's one of the reasons why, as game designers, Panelled Upon is such an amazing experience, right? There's incredible expressibility in how you can rearrange the playfield. You can set up incredibly dangerous combos if you've got the skill and experience to do it, right? All of that disappears in Bejeweled, because the first thing they say is, why don't we fill the whole playfield up? Because once we've done that, the only thing the player can do is switch 2 tiles to make the match. And if it doesn't make the match, it's not a move. Immediately, the clarity of purpose of the game has become just light years easier to pass, right? You don't have to think 10 moves ahead, as you often do playing competitive Panelled Upon. You just have to find a place to switch 2 tiles. And it's hugely volatile, much more volatile than Panelled Upon was. So there's a good chance that randomly flipping tiles, which a lot of casual players did, will set up a huge combo, which is immensely satisfying in the same way that winning a raffle is immensely satisfying, right? It's a brilliant piece of simplification. And this refined version of that system was enormously popular, and doubly so because the other thing that they did was added an untimed mode. Japanese puzzle game designers are allergic to the idea that you are not under time pressure. You must be under time pressure because that's where the fun is, right? Makes sense. Except Bejeweled, untimed mode. Hugely popular. Suddenly, people who were saying, I can't play video games, had a video game they could play, right? Because they could take all the time in the world. They could take 8 hours to find those 2 tiles that switch over. Amazing. And then, 2012, we get Candy Crush Saga, which is basically Bejeweled plus monetization. Good move. Right, what we have here, a new system, Panelled Upon, a brilliant system. I think as a game designer, I admire Panelled Upon way more than these other games. But it's hard to get to grips with. There's a lack of clarity of purpose. Watching a player playing it does not tell you what to do. Doesn't prepare you at all. Like I say, you'll need 8 hours with this game before you appreciate how brilliant it is. And then we get the take 2, right? The attempt to do the same thing, only slightly differently. And then we refine it with Bejeweled. By the time Candy Crush comes out, this approach, this way of operating the game is familiar. Many, many people already knew how to play a match 3 by the time Candy Crush Saga came out. Not necessarily because of Bejeweled, but because of Bejeweled and all the other match 3 games it inspired. Right? So when I talk about player practices, I'm talking about literally what the player learns as a habit to do in a game, right? And in this case, it's to flip 2 tiles to make 3. Simplest of things. But it's a practice invented by Panel Dupont that did not achieve commercial success until it was refined in Bejeweled, which then in comes, is it King for Candy Crush Saga? I forget. Yes, nodding heads. Which King then ripped off in that glorious way that so-called social games are allowed to rip off anything as long as they add monetization. Right, there's my first one. But Chris, you're thinking, Candy Crush Saga is a very simple game. Obviously, that's easy to pick up. So let's up the ante, all right? Minecraft, first available in 2009. Fights online about whether you could get it for $5 or $10. I could swear I got it for $5, but people online will kill you if they say it was available for anything less than $10. Anyway, Minecraft, I'm sure we'll agree, is much more complicated than Candy Crush Saga, right? But everything Minecraft does comes from somewhere else. The FPS controls were formalized in Half-Life in 1998 and then used by every FPS after Half-Life. The inventory and the crafting system, Diablo 2 in 2000. Diablo 2 had the slightly awful but inventive Heraldric Cube, which I feel pretty confident anybody playing Diablo 2 had no idea had a future in video games, but it did. And let's not forget EverQuest. Good old EverQuest, a terrible and wonderful MMORPG that invented the hotbar, which became shortly afterwards the quick bar. Also very important for Minecraft because you want to be able to select stuff easily. Now, the thing is, if we look back here, we will find these practices go back further, just like it did in the case of Candy Crush Saga. So let's track back from Diablo 2. Obviously, I'm going to go to Diablo. That's not terribly interesting. But then, jump back 10 years, get to Dungeon Master. Hands up, anyone in the room who's played Dungeon Master? Yes, awesome. Right, I see all the old people in the room with me. Woo! Yeah, Dungeon Master, huge, huge influence on games. Huge, huge commercial failure. Company dried up and blew away. But it invented this inventory system, the WIMP-style inventory system. The whole insight of this game was to say, hey, operating systems are moving away from complicated command lines. Now we've got the WIMP environment, windows, icons, mouse, pointers. Could we use that to make a better game inventory? Well, I tell you, you look at the RPGs before 1987 and you will be amazed at how crap they are, right? This was a huge breakthrough inventory that Diablo was able to use to make a lot of money, but poor FTL games were not. What about the FPS? Well, Half-Life formalizes the FPS control scheme still in use in 1 billion games today. Quake 2, hilariously the year earlier, sets it up with mouse look, which was an option. In Quake 2, you could select mouse look, which tells me that it had no idea that that was the future. They were just experimenting with it. Hey, maybe this will be cool. Well, it was. Should have done that sooner, and then you'd have had Half-Life and had lots of money. From that, we can track back to Doom, obviously, because Quake descends directly from Doom. And Doom descends directly from 91's Catacomb 3D, which was inspired by, yes, you've guessed it, Dungeon Master, right? Which means the entirety of the core systems in Minecraft all came from this unsuccessful 1987 RPG. Hat tip, I'll literally give you a hat tip, although that means I have to put my hat back on, which I probably shouldn't have done. All from Dungeons and Dragons in 1974, right? There's no Dungeon Master without Dungeons and Dragons, and there's a whole mess of games that that's true for. And sticking out like this makes it clear that in video games, we have a huge debt to Dungeons and Dragons. Don't tell Hasbro I said that. We have a huge debt to it because the FPS lineage is rooted in it, right? All of the RPGs, obviously, are based in it. In fact, pretty much everything that doesn't come from Avalon Hill board games, right, strategy board games, or the arcade is rooted in D&D. So, let me put that together in the same way we did before. Dungeon Master, new, whole new way of doing things. It's brilliant. Every game designer who plays it has their life changed forever, but only game designers play it, right? That's the trouble with being the first mover. You take 2 here is Catacomb 3D, and there's a real insight here. The difference between Dungeon Master and Catacomb 3D. Dungeon Master, right? Fantasy game, biff monsters with a stick, right? Doom, what if we make this faster? What if instead of the turns taking 1.5 seconds, what if the turns take a fraction of a second? And then what if biffing them with a stick, we're gunning them down with a range of hilarious weaponry, right? That's where we get to Doom and all the way into the FPS lineage. So Doom and Quake and Half-Life and the Diablo series are refinements, right? They take these practices that have already been spearheaded, that the game designers have learned, and find ways to put them out to a larger audience. So that by the time we get to Minecraft, it's all familiar, right? I'm not saying that young players who come to Minecraft already know how to work in FPS, although my kids sure did. But the point is, these practices are so widely distributed, I'm not even having to say that Notch played any of these games, because there's no need, because they were in so many games, so many players already did all these things, that by the time Minecraft comes out, the difficulty of learning Minecraft is cut down enormously because players already do most of the stuff that you require to play the game. Now, I hope, if I've done this right, that will not hit you until afterwards, like the Toru Iwatani anecdote at the beginning, that after you come back, that will seep into the back of your brain and something will click, and you'll be able to look at your own games in a slightly different way. Probably won't change how you design games, but it might change how you think and talk about those games, right? All right. You are a brave fighter to have cleared such a difficult stage, says Rastan. Awesome. That was the first stage of the 2 stages that we're going to look at today. Now we're going to move into the second one, which is USPs. Oh, and I heard a sound like 1,000 hearts breaking. Oh no, we're going to deal with marketing. Yes, we are going to deal with marketing. In fact, we're going to deal with the age-old battle, production versus marketing. All right? Hands up in the room if you work in production. I suppose that's me. Hands up if you work in marketing. All right, awesome. Okay, I wasn't sure any marketing people would turn up. So has everyone encountered this battle between production and marketing? It plays out a bit like this. Production says, we have an awesome idea for a game. It's going to do this, it's going to do this, it's a little bit wee, it's a little bit whir, it's a little bit whoo, 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 whoo. And marketing says, yeah, but how are we going to sell it? What game is it already like? And production says, it's not like any game because it's new, it's shiny, it does everything, right? Hands up if you've been in a conversation like that. I have a dozen times. Yeah, right. Good stuff. Well, not good stuff. It's pretty horrific, actually. But this is an age-old battle in video games, right? Because production genuinely has an interest in creating new and interesting systems, is immensely skilled at playing video games, and has played hundreds of thousands of video games, or at least put hundreds of thousands of hours into playing video games, and can handle unbelievably complex systems just like that, right? But marketing has to sell the game. This is actually very, very difficult, although, as a fact, marketing spend is by far the biggest predictor of the success of a game, right? In fact, if you've got a big marketing spend, all you can really do in production is fail, right? You suddenly become the risk factor if you've already got the large marketing budget behind you, because the expectation is big marketing spend equals success. Doesn't always work that way. Humans are funny creatures in a good way and in a terrible way. But marketing, terribly important. And this concern of the marketing department, how are we going to sell it, is actually very, very sensible. Because your bells and whistles, fantastic new idea, who is going to discover this game? You can do as I used to do in my early career and believe, oh, if we make something brilliant, people will find it. I assure you, they will not. Yes. One of my most creative games, I think, sold 100 units. Good sales figures, yes. Yeah, marketing's actually much more important than game designers give credit. Whereas I think marketing understands that game design is important, even though they have no idea what game designers do, right? It's a complete mystery. But they know the one way to sell a game is to find games that are already selling, whose players you can bring in. If the synapses are firing, you might already see the connection between this and the first stage that we cleared. So let's get stuck into the venerable USP. Here's a game you might not have heard of. It's Halo Combat Evolved. So here is the back of the box for the original release of Halo, and I'm going to read to you the USPs, the unique selling points, the bullet points that the marketing department put on the back of the box. Here they are. Attack on all fronts, on foot, or with a powerful array of assault vehicles. Ooh. Seamless, hyper-real indoor and outdoor environments. Intense multiplayer team battles, 4-player split screen, or multiplayer system link play. Ooh. Unleash destruction with incredible human and alien weapons. Okay, now actually, as USPs go, this is not too bad. We don't have the classic sucky USP that says, over 20 weapons, or even worse, I can't, polycount stuff. Goodness, steer clear from a game where one of the USPs is going to tell you something about polycounts, right? I mean, nobody cares. These are not bad as USPs go, but I don't really capture what's interesting about this game, right? I mean, I think, to be honest, the main reason that people bought Halo Combat Evolved was that it was launch title for Xbox and it was the best thing on it at the time, right? But also, it was really good. But what was really good about it? It wasn't really what these were. I mean, it does have vehicles, right? But so did every FPS at that point, because the processing power had gone up and the poly count had gone up, so vehicles were suddenly possible. I mean, everything was doing vehicles here. Battlefield 1942 is coming out at a similar time, and there's several other FPSs adding vehicles. Seamless hyper-real indoor and outdoor environments. Would anyone buy a game because it's got seamless environments? I mean, this is also a selling point for Jack and Daxter, right? What it really means is we pumped a lot of money to our programmers and they found a way to do loading in the background. I mean, big win for games, not something really that the player cares about. So I would question whether or not these kind of USPs, which is what we now think of as a USP, are really unique selling points, or whether they're just the usual silly puff, right? To some extent, I think production thinks that the job of the marketing department is to make usual silly puff in order to sell their game. I don't think that's right, and I don't think that's fair to the marketing department either. The thing is, when in games we first came up with the idea of a unique selling point, it did not mean usual silly puff bullet points attempting to make the game sound cool and exciting. On the contrary, at the time, it meant something different. And that was the unique selling point. Originally, it wasn't bullet points in the back of the box. It was, what is the unique selling point of this game, right? What is it that makes this game worth buying? Yeah, what unique aspect of this game, and uniqueness is what production prizes, makes it sell, which is what marketing prizes, right? It's an alliance of forces here, right? And the unique selling point of Halo, although it's perhaps not the way that the production department would put it, is right there in the title. Combat Evolved, right? Now, obviously, Combat Evolved sounds a lot like a sort of, am I allowed to swear? Yeah, okay. I never know, because there might be youngsters listening online. Obviously, Combat Evolved sounds like a bullshitty thing that came out of marketing, right? But it's an accurate description of the vision that Bungie had for this game. They wanted to look at what the FPS was doing up to that point, which was Half-Life, as we already saw, and say, what can we do to take this to another level, right? Part of that was adding vehicles and turrets, but like I say, everyone was adding vehicles and turrets. That just came from the upgrade in the hardware. No, the genius of Halo from a game design perspective, in fact, put it to the floor. I'll just take the first one I want to. What do you think was the main game design breakthrough of Halo? Regen shields, to someone over there. Yeah, I can see why you would say that. I'm not going to take any more because I'll get into trouble for not giving out the lollipop to put to you. So the regen shields is a change in Halo, and it is part of this Combat Evolved, but it's nowhere near as significant as the biggest change and the hardest change to get programmers to sign off on, which was to reduce the weapon inventory to 2 weapons, right? Every FPS before Halo, you carry around a little arsenal, an entirely implausible arsenal of weapons, right? Because you're going to have a pistol, a pair of pistols, a shotgun, an SMG, an assault rifle, a missile launcher, a comedy weapon, and probably some form of explosives, right? And the way you dealt with that was that you scrolled forwards and backwards through a long list of weapons, right? And this was horrific. If you aren't old enough to remember what that was like, it's impossible to express to you how awful it was to die because you switched to your tickling stick instead of to your missile launcher or whatever it was, right? Removing this enormous inventory was actually very difficult for Bungie to get off. Programmers in particular, I don't want to only have 2 weapons. I want to have all the weapons, right? It was very difficult to win. But the game designers won out because coming down to 2 weapons improved the clarity of purpose of the game enormously. Because now, instead of scrolling through an enormous list of weapons, and worse in many games, an enormous list of weapons that's different every time according to what you're carrying, right? Now, your one button switches between 2 weapons. You know every time what that button does, right? There's huge clarity there. And then add to that the idea that you're standing by a weapon and you hold that to switch it. An amazing breakthrough in game design. I don't believe enough people appreciate just how clever that was or how difficult it was for Bungie to push through. Because the prevailing player practice in FPS games, as I say, was to Arnold Schwarzenegger it and have a whole backpack full of weapons that you're carting around. And the case had to be made that we will get huge advantages if we just come down to 2 weapons. And I doubt that anybody spoke about clarity of purpose. But that is what was gained here, right? Suddenly, you have a button that means switch weapons, not hunt hopelessly for one weapon amongst several. It changed FPS games. So there's one example, but this example, I think, gives us an alternative meaning of USP, rather than unique selling point, which is fine, but devalued by the usual silly puff bullet points, right? We can think of USP as a unique statement of purpose, right? Game designers and production in general, if they're on top of their game, which they usually are, have a vision for the game. That vision for the game is, from the design side, the unique statement of purpose. But the challenge somewhere in development is for that vision to get translated into something the marketing department can use. And if you have a unique statement of purpose that works as both a vision for the team and for the marketing department to sell the bloody thing at the end, that's an absolutely winning move for most commercial video games, right? There's a gap to be bridged here, and it's difficult because marketing don't really speak the same language as production and vice versa. Marketing don't really understand production, and production tends to think that marketing's job is to travel abroad and drink a lot of alcohol in bars, which is half true, actually, but we'll not go there. So as well as Halo Combat Evolved, I've picked a couple of other examples that are parallel, whereby there's a unique statement of purpose, and because it's such a good one, it's baked into the game somewhere, right? So there's my second example. Gran Turismo, the real driving simulator. This is a lie, right? It's a lie in the way that every Hollywood movie is a lie, right? And in particular, it had to be a lie here, because what's really real in Gran Turismo is the vehicle licenses, right? What makes this the real driving simulator is that you can really drive an imaginary Ferrari, right? Which you couldn't do if you didn't make a licensing deal, which your marketing department probably did for you, with Ferrari. And what did Ferrari say when they were approached by Sony? They said, oh, we don't want to see pictures of Ferraris crashing or blowing up. So what doesn't happen in Gran Turismo? You do not crash or blow up. You are glued to the ground in a way that defies physics to an unimaginable degree, right? In order that the real cars that the game is simulating, right, will not actually do what a real car would do. Take a real Ferrari up to 200 miles an hour, and you will answer important existential questions about the afterlife. But do it in Gran Turismo, as I did, and you can sail around the tracks by conforming to the rails, a technique which I assure you will not work on a real racetrack. But unique statement of purpose, the real driving simulator, sell the real illusion of driving. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. As is this one, which you probably know by another name, Biohazard, right? Resident Evil, yeah, Resident Evil, which right from the outset on the Japanese box has, for no obvious reason in English at the bottom, survival horror, right? It isn't what the marketing department chose. I'm really curious as to how it got there. Can I translate that? Biohazard. No, okay, that's just basically saying what the game is in Japanese. That's not really telling you anything useful. Later, with the 2002 re-release, they picked up on how successful this term survival horror is. How could they not? Everybody had decided that their game was a survival horror now, right? That had impact. And they gave it this title, Enter the Survival Horror, it says on the 2002 GamesCube re-release, or indeed any remastered version of it. They love to pretend that the marketing department, Capcom, came up with this in the first place. But they didn't. No. But that someone somewhere had this idea, survival horror. It was the unique statement of purpose of the game. My suspicion is the production department had this idea that this game was going to be a survival horror because they nicked it from another game, Alone in the Dark, right? Don't get me wrong, Resident Evil is leaps and bounds ahead of Alone in the Dark, but as we've already seen, that's the way it goes. You see here, this idea of having a unique statement of purpose, right? It is something that unites the production and the marketing side of the project if it's done well. It tells the production side how to make the design decisions in order to conform with the vision of the game, and it gives the marketing department a means to sell the game to the audience who's eventually going to play it, right? And I think this is enormously compatible with what I was presenting earlier about player practices, because what the marketing department really would like is for you to find a game whose practices, the things that the player does, are things they're already paying money for. Because it's a reasonable bet, if they're already paying money to do this, they might pay money for your game to do it, especially if it's good at what it does, right? Excellent. Once again, you are a brave fighter to have cleared such a difficult stage. Love me some Rastan. If you don't know Rastan and you're into barbarian man candy, then get an emulator and go and play Taito's Rastan Saga. It is obviously Conan the Barbarian without a license. Brilliant game, brilliant game. All right, so, you know, I learned something today. Well, I hope you did. Anyway, let's recap what we covered in these two stages that we cleared together. So the first question, how are we building on existing player practices? Or if you like, what is it players already learned how to do that they can do in our game, but better? They'll enjoy it more, they'll have more agency, they'll blah, 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 whatever it is. What are you building on? What are you taking that the player already knows? And I want to give a completely different example to the one I gave in the talk, which is Reigns, 2016's Reigns, which I suspect many of you know. Hands up if you played Reigns. Yeah, almost all of you, right? Go on, I'll risk a shout out, even though I'm not going to send the lollipop round. Built on what? Based on what? What player practice? Tinder, spot on. Prize for the gentleman, or a no prize, as Stanley used to say. Yes, 2012's Tinder had a brilliant interface insight. Swipe left, swipe right. And from Tinder, it was everywhere. Suddenly, every app had this practice of swiping left, swiping right. And so the team that made Reigns, they went to Devolver, and to my knowledge, this is the last time somebody successfully pitched a game on just the idea, right? As you probably know, in order to get money out of games now, you have to make a vertical slice, which means you have to have already made the game to show that it's going to work. Good stuff. But here, they went and pitched. They pitched the idea. They said, look, Everybody knows this Tinder interface. We have an idea to make a narrative game that uses this thing that everybody already knows how to do. And Devolver said, how much do you want? They said, not that much. And so off they went. And they made it, big hit. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. The joy here was there was very little risk in going at this. They didn't have to spend much money to do it. And they knew that everyone coming to it would understand the interface, because even if they'd never used Tinder, and I'm sure you're all too nice people to have ever used something as grotty as Tinder, but even if you've never used Tinder, you have an immense clarity of purpose to that swipe left, swipe right, right? It's incredibly easy to grasp, right? It does not require a 10-hour tutorial, like a Japanese RPG sometimes does, to explain how the system works. You get it just like that. Okay. Then, what is our unique statement of purpose, right? Our USP, our unique selling point. I'm suggesting unique statement of purpose. And for this, I want to take this example. What have we got? Mugen no asobi, right? Usually translated as infinite play. Anyone know what it's from? No? Breath of the Wild, right? This was the internal vision for the game. And infinite play is how it's usually been translated, but that phrase means unbounded play, right? And the idea was that the world would have multiple sites in it that would be slightly obscured from each other, that you would travel round between and have reasons to travel back in different ways. That going to one place gives you another reason to go somewhere else. That's the infinite play, right? It's a very clever way of approaching the open world problem of huge space, nothing to do, by having lots and lots of things to do and lots of systems that give you reasons to go to different places and to go back to different places. That's the infinite play. And since we're running out of time, lastly, to take us back to where we came in, we'll return to Toru Iwatani. Do we have clarity of purpose, right? You can't always have it. Sometimes the kind of game that you're making has reasons why it's difficult to get to clarity of purpose. But the more you can get to that instant accessibility, that the moment you see it, you either know what to do or understand why it's fun, right? I love Katamari Damacy, as I'm sure many of you do. That has a weird clarity of purpose. Looking at it certainly doesn't tell you how to control it. It's incomprehensible. Because Keita Takahashi thought he'd mimic what it's like to really roll a ball, which no video game designer would ever have thought was a good idea. But it has clarity of purpose because you watch someone playing it, you roll over the small stuff and you get bigger, right? There's your clarity of purpose. You don't have to have the player know everything. You don't have to have clarity of purpose everywhere, but there has to be some way in, right? That clarity of purpose gets your new players into the fun of your game. And increasingly, if you have it, streamers will pick up your game, right? Because if there's clarity of purpose, streamers will want to show it. It's a win for everyone, a win for production, a win for marketing. Excellent. I'm sorry, I used up all the QA time, so I don't have to take questions. Woohoo! Awesome. But thank you so much for coming to my talk. I've had a blast talking to you today. Feel free to corner me and bend my ear off after we finish. My name's Chris Bateman. Thank you all for coming today.